Hello and a very warm welcome to the brand new edition of To The Point. I'm Kriti Mishra. And on today's edition, my guest is NDRF Chief, Mr. N.Pradhan. Sir, welcome to Rajya Sabha Television and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So first and foremost, mock drills will be conducted in all the districts for biological, radiological, chemical or even nuclear disasters. Tell me, what are the preparations and how are you ensuring the participation of the stakeholders and the people?
Actually, the main issue here is that so far in the last several years, CBRN has not been the focus of mock drills. We have done mock drills for cyclones, floods, the usual. But CBRN being the focus is essential now because the new age disasters around the corner and probably present and real danger is of the chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear disasters. And in the modern India, I think we should be absolutely prepared for it. Having said that, I think there is a optimism bias because we feel that it will not happen to us. That's the optimism bias, and it's a wrong bias to have. And I think states who are the owners of disaster response, first up, and the community should buy into the fact that we should be a disaster ready country in CBRN. We are disaster ready in many respects in cyclones and floods, as I said, to a great extent. But we are not to that extent disaster ready in terms of CBRN. So, as you asked, it's a good thing that the Government of India, the Union Home Minister himself has mandated that there should be at least one mock drill in the next 3 years in each of the 700 odd districts of this country. Given that, we have decided to have a focus more on CBRN. Not all mock drills, not in all districts would be CBRN, but we'll try to make it CBRN in most districts which specifically have chemical complexes or industrial complexes. Stakeholder buy-in is an issue, as I said, because of the optimism bias and because of the thought that probably disasters are not a mainstream part of governance. District administrations and state administrations are not totally clued into this. But now the time has come and I'm happy that there is better response now. Recently, we even were approached by some private sector undertakings, public sector undertakings, very institutional undertakings like railways and the civil aviation units. They are all very keen to have mock drills and we are preparing for that. It's good that the National Disaster Management Authority, the NDMA, which is the highest policy making body for disaster response and disaster management, ex officio chaired by the Prime Minister himself. The Secretary NDMA has written a DO letter to all the chief secretaries of the country, of the states in the country, to collaborate with NDRF as the nodal point for all these mock exercises. So I think it's a different scenario now, a greater level of awareness now, and I expect very good results in the next couple of years or 3 years.
All right, sir, since we're talking about good results, there's another optimistic news that India could get the UN mandate for international disaster rescue operations. It will be authorized by Switzerland-based INSARC. Tell us, why is this categorization or authorization important? What will change?
What will change is the recognition, formal recognition of NDRF and India as an international disaster responder. We have done international disaster response in the past. We have gone to Japan in 2011. In 2015, we have gone to Nepal for the earthquake. But that was bilateral. In the case of being certified by INSARC, INSARC is a UN body under the UN OCHA. So if you get a certification for INSARC, it is like a certification of a product which comes from the Bureau of Indian Standards, for example, an ISO certification. It's in a similar vein. The NDRF teams will be certified as international disaster response capable teams. So in short, in practice, what will happen is if there is a disaster in any corner of the world and the UN requests India for the participation of NDRF, NDRF should be and would be able to fly out of India into those destinations and do disaster response activities just as it does inside India. So that will be, I think, a great mark of a prestigious tag to have, and it will raise the level of awareness not only inside the country, but it will probably be a game changer for NDRF and also a game changer for India as a disaster ready nation, because this is the ultimate aim, that not only we are disaster ready, not only we are disaster aware, but our responding mechanism is world class. So this will be proved and underlined once NDRF is notified by the INSRAG as a international disaster ready force.
So sir, by when do we expect that authorization?
The INSRAG authorization is akin to a ISI authorization or tag, just like standardization of a product is there, an ISO certification. Similarly, the INSRAG certification is like a standardization of an international rescue team. And if that tag comes to NDRF, it will be like prestigious tag for NDRF as an international response capable team, disaster response team. And that has other cascading effects. It will not only be able to galvanize India as a template of disaster response, a world-class template of disaster response. What is more important is every time there is a request from the United Nations for deputing NDRF teams across the world in any disaster situation, India will be able to take the call of deputing NDRF teams, and we'll be able to, just like peacekeeping forces of the UN, we'll be a UN disaster response force, UN mandated disaster response force. The interesting aspect is that we have done this bilaterally earlier. We have gone to Nepal in 2015, gone to Japan in 2011, but at the behest of UN as a world standardized mechanism, this has not happened. There are some protocols to be followed, so that process has started. I would expect that sometime in the year 2021 financial year or 21-22 financial year, we should be able to get that tag.
All right, sir. Another aspect of breaking the glass ceiling. We had the first batch of women combatants in rescue operations. They were deployed, I believe, in Garhmukteshwar in Uttar Pradesh.
Yes.
How was the experience? What was the feedback? And what were the challenges, if any?
I'm glad you asked that question, because this is something which was in the works for a long time. Just for the information of all concerned, in every battalion of NDRF, there is a generic sanction of 108 rescuers who would be women, 108. But that could not have been accomplished because of various structural reasons. We are fed by the various paramilitary forces. Now, the paramilitary forces themselves had great number of vacancies in their women cadre. CISF, for example, has women cadre, but they could not be spared, probably because they needed them in the airports, and that also they did not have enough. But now, because of the intervention of the central government and the Home Ministry, Union Home Ministry, the induction started early in 2020, and I'm glad to report that more than almost 150 women rescuers or potential women rescuers have joined. In Ghaziabad battalion itself, 8th battalion, there are almost 30 plus rescuers, about 40 rescuers who have not only joined, but they have been trained, and they were actually deputed, as you were saying, to Garhmukteshwar in UP as an all women rescuers team. And I am very happy to report that they are capable, equally capable, if not more capable than the men counterparts. They are doing all the activities and all the verticals of training, from CSSR to water rescue to vertical rescue to things like MFR, medical first response. Everything they are able to do, and with equal felicity, with equal capability, with equal finesse. So I would say that a new era has dawned in NDRF, and we will soon have in every operations rescuers who are women, who will bring to the whole system a greater degree of empathy. It's not as if empathy was not there among the men, but a greater sense of empathy and a greater degree of reaching out to especially women and children and people of the old age, where they'll find comfort. It goes without saying that a woman who is being rescued, suppose she is pregnant, or a child, a girl child especially, who is being rescued, who is in a bad way, if she sees a woman operative, a rescuer, the comfort level will be that much higher. These are cultural issues that we all understand. So I think it will add a great dimension and positivity to the entire NDRF operation, and I'm really looking forward to that in the days to come.
Alright sir, talking about the COVID pandemic. Now it threw unprecedented challenges in the disaster mitigation across the globe. What was the experience of NDRF and what were the new SOPs that you developed?
COVID was a very difficult challenge. We were preparing for disasters like floods and cyclones as usual. But this was not business as usual. This was business unusual. It came upon us suddenly, and it was, as I call it, a disaster within a disaster. Every time we faced a disaster which was traditional, like a flood or a cyclone, we knew that another big disaster was enveloping that disaster. So we had to handle cyclones in the time of COVID, floods in the time of COVID. COVID was a constant context with which you have to handle the particular natural disaster or a man-made disaster. So, just to paraphrase it in a different way, the rescuer from NDRF had to go into a flooded area or a maroon village, knowing fully well that the village is COVID affected. Many people are COVID affected, but there is no option of not rescuing them. So the preparation had to be more from the NDRF side, that first the NDRF operative has to make himself or herself safe. It's like the principle in airline safety. First you put the oxygen mask on yourself. Only when you are safe, you will be able to help others. So it is the same principle. If the rescuer himself is in danger and exposed to danger, then he will not be able to complete the operation fruitfully and effectively. So we put a great focus on the SOPs and protocols and the discipline of immunizing all our personnel, and it was strictly followed. They were given the specialized kits. We even innovated on the kits, made them waterproof kits, and gave them so that they were not infected when they were wading into water, which is water in the area where there is COVID affected village, or bringing in people onto the boat who are COVID affected. They were even ready to give masks and sanitize those people, but all those protocols were followed to a T, and probably that is why, touch wood, we still have the minimal number of infections and minimal casualty. In fact, we have just one unfortunate casualty, that too because he had comorbidities, serious comorbidities. Otherwise, so far we have done very well, in spite of the fact that we have handled 4 cyclones, countrywide flood situation, gas tragedy in Visakhapatnam, all within the time of COVID. But I think the discipline, the protocol, the morale of the force, in spite of facing the dual challenge, has been an all-time high, and I think we have crossed the chasm with a lot of success and effectively.
One would agree to that, sir. But primarily, NDRF is to assist the states because constitutionally it is the responsibility of the states. But many states still do not have their SDRFs. What is the way ahead?
I would say that the guidelines that were issued by the National Disaster Management Authority following the National Disaster Management Act 2005 very unequivocally says that every state must have its SDRF, the State Disaster Response Force. We must not forget that it is the mandate of the state that they manage the disasters upfront. NDRF is a force of assistance, very clearly mentioned in Section 44I of the NDMA Act, that it is a force of assistance, and understanding that it's a state response or a district response, NDRF will go in assistance, and that too as a specialist force. So just like a specialist doctor goes after there is a stabilization of the patient, the specialist force should be ideally going after the situation stabilizes or while it is being stabilized by the local stakeholders. But unfortunately, because of a comparative lack of consideration, awareness, I think, and concern to an extent towards disaster response as a mainstream part of governance in some states. I would say some states have done very well, but many states are still dithering about considering disaster response and management as a critical part of mainstream governance. And I think that is a mistake. That mistake should be corrected. I am happy that the situation is not as bad as it was, say, a decade ago or 5 years ago. And in my own tenure of 2 years, I have seen a great change in the response of the states. But then that has to be taken to its logical conclusion. States must be more prepared. They must have its SDRF. And I would be open in my declaration through your channel, very clear in my declaration that NDRF is willing to handhold the setting up of SDRF in every state. We are willing to see it through the logical conclusion till it is raised, till it is trained, till it is ready. But that can only happen when the states are mentally prepared, politically ready, and in a manner of institutional readiness, they decide to have an SDRF as part of their readiness about disasters. If that happens, NDRF is willing to handhold through and through. So I wish that happens in the coming few months or years. If that happens, India will be that much closer to disaster readiness.
So there's another important aspect that now we have disaster management under the CSR. What will be the impact?
I think it's a very valid question, because under the corporate social responsibility of private companies or even public sector companies, business institutions, disaster management was never a subject under the CSR. But now that it is, I think it's a golden opportunity for the country, because I always take the example of a country like Japan or even Chile, who are both earthquake prone. They have brought a culture of readiness. And what is a culture of readiness? In disaster response parlance, it's called whole of society approach.
Okay. The
entire society responds as one unit in preparing for disaster. So it's a combination of whole of government approach. So whether it is state or central government or the local government, everybody, all governments come together. If the central government of India says that it's a state subject, cyclone has happened in X state and we would not go, that is not, that's not feasible, because it is a national crisis, or at least even if it's a regional crisis, it affects the nation and its economy and its society. So society has one, government has one approach. That can only happen if there is a culture of readiness, and that is very much required. And I'm happy to see that there is at least some interest being generated towards that. CSR can really contribute to that interest, because if private companies come together, they are very much part of the industrial complexes. They have their industries or they have their units within industrial complexes, or every private company which is manufacturing or otherwise, even IT companies, they exist within a part of a district. If they can contribute to the disaster readiness of that district or that locality, it will be a great impact to the overall preparation. I'll just give you a small example before I sign off on this, that suppose there's a factory which apart from its own equipment, or as part of its own equipment has earth movers, for example. Now earth movers can be a great resource in an area where there has been a landslide or a building collapse, or an earthquake that has happened, even if mild earthquake because of which building has collapsed. An earth mover can be a great asset. It does not matter if it comes from a private source, but if the private source is aware that if there is a building collapse, my earth mover can be requisitioned by the district administration, it will be a great help. So it's a win-win solution. It's a force multiplier. Your asset, which is private asset, is used for the country's service, for the people's service, for the citizen service. This grid is being now raised. We are through a network called the IDRN, Indian Disaster Response Network. Now, what is this network? We are making a database, and NIDM is doing it, National Institute of Disaster Management is doing it, a database of all such resources, equipment including manpower. So, if there is, suppose, a paramedic who is a part of a private hospital or a private company's hospital, he can be a resource in a disaster response situation. If there is there are medicines they can be of use in a disaster situation, even if it's for a private hospital. So this network of equipment and manpower, if this can be combined and everybody is aware, at the click of a button on the mobile, they can find out that in this district, which is the resource which is available. That grid, that network can be a great efficiency and force multiplier for disaster response. And every country which wants to be disaster ready must have these things mapped out very, very clearly as a database, which is very readily available to any stakeholder who is handling disasters. So if this happens, I think it will be a great thing, and CSR can contribute to a great extent to that.
So of course, one component is of disaster response, but the other one is disaster resilient infrastructure. Now, Prime Minister Modi has talked about a coalition on this. What is your assessment of India?
Well, India, I think, is not only leading the way, but it is rightly leading the way because it is probably going to be the biggest user or beneficiary of our disaster resilient infrastructure. We all know that India faces multiple disasters. It is prone to cyclones, it is prone to floods, it is prone to, you name a disaster, it is prone to that. It has all the 4 zones, 2 to 5 zones of earthquake. Among the 5 seismic zones, 4 zones are relevant to India. So it is obvious that we have to have that kind of a readiness, and unless we have that readiness, we'll always falter. So it is very important that this happens in India. The coalition of the disaster resilient infrastructure was conceived by the Prime Minister primarily because of that our infrastructure has to be readied, because in India, because of the greater population pressure, the infrastructure pressure is also high. Our roads, our electrical grid, our telecom grid, the entire infrastructure is under pressure, and we are a developing nation. So we are creating more and more infrastructure to cater to the resource gap and the demand for infrastructure. The direction which we take is going to be critical to our economy and our disaster readiness. There is, for example, talk about underground cabling.
Yes.
Why? Because that infrastructure is disaster resistant or disaster resilient in terms of a cyclone. Suppose there is coastal area, 7,500 kilometers of our coastline is open to cyclones and even floods or cloudburst situations. What will happen to the housing along the coast? Bangladesh, for example, which is faced with floods every year and cyclones, they have started this experiment in cyclone and flood resistant housing, rural housing, to the extent that they have innovated a rural housing or a poor household which floats when the floods happen. It actually floats. It has been rewarded internationally and as an international innovation in housing, disaster resilient housing. I'm just giving an example. Just like underground cabling in cyclone affected areas or flood affected areas, similarly typical housing, which is like we have Prime Minister's housing yojana. Now Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, can it be calibrated in such a way in coastal areas where the housing infrastructure for the poor is cyclone resistant? So there is a lot of thinking that has to go into it. I'm glad that the initiative has already been taken. It's a long way to go, but at least there is a awareness that every time we think in terms of a massive infrastructure injection, we have to think in terms of whether they will be disaster resilient.
Sir, I'm sorry to interject, but that's a fantastic idea that you gave. Have you spoken to the concerned ministries? What we have done is, in the past, we did not have this practice of sharing our experiences of, say, collapse structures. Our briefs, we make briefs, post-operation briefs. We don't share it normally with the participating or the stakeholder ministry. For example, we don't share it with the MOUD or, but now we have, luckily, the NDMA, which is the all-encompassing policy body. So we share our briefs and debriefs with that body, and they have within that the CDRI, which is functioning within the NDMA.
So we share our briefs with them so that the learning and the lessons from say a collapse structure, why a structure collapsed or why a structure was damaged during the cyclone or the floods, those learnings from a practitioner's point of view who have seen it on ground, that can be taken, and maybe engineers can think about it. We can give an example of why did the structure, in a multi-story structure, where does it collapse? Which are the points of vulnerability? Which is the most weakest point of collapse? All these things can be inputs for engineers and structural engineers to think about seriously and plan the disaster resilient building or disaster resilient infrastructure.
Lastly, Mr. Pradhan, way ahead for modernization of NDRF.
I think one of the areas would be the equipment upgradation. We must remember that our 310 state-of-the-art equipment, which were state-of-the-art in 2010 when they were being procured, may not be state-of-the-art uniformly now, which is already a decade old. And times are changing, technology is changing very fast, everything is becoming digital. What was, say, petrol-operated machine is now battery-operated or even a dry battery-operated. The battery technology also is changing. And I'm saying all this because we are an equipment-driven force. So it is very important that our equipment is reviewed and modernized in pace with the demands of the situation. I'm happy to report that now the first steps have started being taken. An entire review of the equipment is ready. It has gone for the approval of the NDMA and the Ministry of Home, and I'm sure in the days to come there will be sanctions and approvals which will be coming through the system, and we'll be able to procure. Some of the equipments that we required urgently, we have already procured. One of our bread and butter equipment or systems that we require is with the water rescue systems. Yes. Boats are very much a part of that water rescue system. You will be surprised to know that till last 6 months we did not have enough number of boats as per our authorization, although we faced floods in the past. Now we have enough number of boats because of the government's intervention. So things are looking up, and we are also on the next side, I would say, on the plus side, we are going massively for space research, space technology, geospatial technology and GIS technology for mapping the operations, for mapping the incidents that have happened in the past so far in independent India, and having a map-based data of all potential disaster hotspots, including, say, chemical factories or water bodies where situations can happen, or dams which can be prone to some disasters. All these mapping has started, the process has started with the help of the relevant ministries. So I think that there is a technology push that is happening, a modernization push, if you may, and I think that will take us in the right direction. I hope that maybe 5 years from now, it will not only be a UN certified force, it will also be a state-of-the-art modern force, and probably digitized, map-driven with map intelligence and human int, map int in all combinations. I think it will be a force which India is, I'm sure, already proud of, but we'll all be very proud of, because it will be probably a template for the rest of the world.
On that sanguine note, thank you so much for joining us, sir, and giving us those interesting and important insights.
Thank you so much. Thank you.